Trump's Ukraine policy continues to undermine U.S. NATO commitments, but NATO allies stand firm. President Donald Trump's foreign policy decisions continue to align with Russian interests and reshape NATO dynamics, sparking concerns about U.S. commitments to NATO and Ukraine. His recent statements questioning Ukraine's NATO membership and suggesting that Kyiv may need to concede territory to Russia have alarmed European allies. However, despite Trump's stance, NATO's European members are reinforcing their support for Ukraine and appear ready to bolster the alliance's defense strategies, even if the U.S. scales back its role. This report examines how Trump's stance impacts NATO's unity, the countermeasures European allies are implementing, and how NATO might adapt to reduced U.S. involvement. Trump's stance on Ukraine and NATO. In recent remarks, Trump downplayed Ukraine's ability to reclaim all occupied territories and expressed that he was okay with Ukraine not joining NATO. His administration has reportedly engaged in talks with Vladimir Putin about a potential ceasefire, raising fears that the U.S. may push for a settlement favoring Russia. These statements directly contradict previous U.S. commitments and undermine Ukraine's NATO aspirations. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reinforced Trump's position at a NATO meeting in Brussels, stating that Ukraine's NATO membership was unlikely and that the restoration of Crimea and other Russian-occupied areas might not be realistic. This shift in Washington's stance has been met with dismay in Kyiv and celebration in Moscow. Russia views Trump's approach as an opportunity to fracture NATO, weaken Western-backed Ukrainian resistance, and reshape Europe's security landscape. NATO allies push back against Trump's softening on Russia. Despite Trump's ambiguity toward Ukraine, NATO's European leaders have responded firmly with public declarations of support and strengthened military commitments. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer reaffirmed Ukraine's irreversible path to NATO membership and dismissed unilateral negotiations between Trump and Putin, emphasizing that Ukraine must be part of any peace discussions. French President Emmanuel Macron rejected any peace deal forcing Ukraine to surrender land, calling such a move capitulation. Macron made it clear that only Zelensky and the Ukrainian people should decide their future. Germany and Poland expressed concerns over the U.S. distancing itself from Ukraine, with Germany reaffirming its long-term military and economic commitments, and Poland strengthening regional defense alliances to counter Russian aggression. NATO defense ministers convened in Brussels to reinforce their collective stance against Russia and warned that any concessions to Moscow would only embolden further territorial expansion. How NATO could adapt if the U.S. pulls back. If Trump's administration reduces U.S. commitments to Ukraine, NATO will have to recalibrate its approach to maintain strategic stability in Europe. Here's how NATO might adapt. 1. Increased European defense spending and military aid. Germany, France, the UK, and Poland have already committed to higher military budgets in response to Russia's ongoing aggression. The EU may establish independent military financing mechanisms to ensure that Ukraine continues to receive weapons and training, even without full U.S. funding. Bilateral defense agreements between NATO states could help fill gaps left by a potential reduction in U.S. military aid. 2. Strengthening the European defense framework. With the U.S. stepping back, the UK and France, NATO's two European nuclear powers, may assume greater leadership roles in coordinating NATO strategy. The EU's Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, and the European Defence Fund could be expanded to enhance joint military coordination, reducing reliance on American command structures. A more self-reliant European defense bloc could emerge, ensuring that Russia faces a unified Western front, even if Trump weakens U.S. support. 3. Bolstering NATO's eastern flank. Poland and the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all of whom view Russia as an existential threat, would push for increased NATO troop deployments along Europe's eastern border. New NATO bases and expanded military infrastructure in Finland and Sweden could deter Russian threats in the Baltic region. Joint military drills and intelligence sharing initiatives would be expanded to counter Russian hybrid warfare tactics. 4. Strengthening cyber and information warfare defenses. NATO has already enhanced cybersecurity measures through the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, CCDCOE, in Estonia. Intelligence sharing and counter-disinformation efforts would be scaled up to protect against Russian digital propaganda aimed at dividing NATO nations. A stronger NATO-wide strategy against cyber warfare and election interference would be critical in countering Russia's influence operations. Challenges NATO faces without U.S. leadership. While NATO has the capability to step up its defenses, the absence of full U.S. backing presents several challenges. Financial gaps. The U.S. has provided billions in military aid to Ukraine. Can Europe sustain that level of funding independently? Lack of military coordination. NATO relies heavily on U.S. intelligence, logistics, and command structures. Can Europe quickly develop alternatives? Risk of political divisions. Some European nations, such as Hungary and Slovakia, already lean pro-Russian. A divided NATO could weaken its collective stance against Putin's aggression. How Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation as head of intelligence changes the equation. Trump's appointment of Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, DNI, adds another layer of uncertainty to U.S. policy toward Ukraine and NATO. Gabbard's past rhetoric on Russia. Frequent guest on Russian-backed media, RT Sputnik, where she criticized U.S. intervention in Ukraine. Advocated against military aid to Ukraine, aligning with Kremlin talking points. Russian state media and social media bots have boosted her messaging in past U.S. elections. What this means for NATO intelligence sharing. Could Gabbard downplay Russian cyber threats? There are concerns that she may shift U.S. intelligence assessments in a way that benefits Moscow. Will NATO allies trust U.S. intelligence under Gabbard's leadership? If European intelligence agencies see her as compromised, they may withhold sensitive information. Impact on NATO's cyber defense. If Gabbard weakens U.S. responses to Russian cyber warfare, NATO will have to compensate with stronger independent digital security measures. Conclusion: NATO's resolve remains strong, but new challenges lie ahead. While Trump's stance on Ukraine has created uncertainty, NATO's European allies remain resolute in their commitment to Kyiv. The UK, France, Germany, and Poland have already prepared to take on greater responsibility for Ukraine's defense. The biggest test will be whether Europe can sustain military and financial support without full U.S. involvement. If Trump and Gabbard reduce American backing, NATO must accelerate its independent defense strategies, expand its military funding, and reinforce European leadership to prevent Ukraine from becoming vulnerable to Russian advances. Do you think NATO can hold the line without full U.S. support? Let us know your thoughts below.